Well, I really don't see myself as an important leader. I see myself as a woman who is committed to social change, and that's important to make that difference because when you start seeing yourself as an important leader, you start getting crazy. All right, now to go on with, your question is an important one because the question of sexism affects political work in many senses. Um, for example, I joined the movement in the 60s and I participated in different organizations, and since I was new and young and didn't know anything, I basically was happy being a gopher because you can, learn a lot being a gopher. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life as a gopher. And there came a point when I began to resent people thinking that it was my biological destiny to be a gopher. That's when it started to get rough. And I began to see that, the sisters were the most efficient people in almost all of the organizations that I worked for, were also the most silent people in all of the organizations that I worked with and for, were also the most neglected, unlistened to group of people in all of the organizations that I work with. And we're also the most powerless people in all of the organizations I work with. And the image of a leader was always male. And when people would talk about leadership, they said the leader, he, there was never any female counterpart of the leader. And after being in the movement for a while, I got categorized as an animal called a good sister or a strong sister. Now, a good sister, a strong sister is supposed to work like a horse from morning to night, cover everybody's mistakes. Oh, I need this tomorrow. So you sit up all night typing, and, neglect other parts of your life that are really necessary, that are really important to cover some inefficient, unprincipled mistake or negligent part on the part of your male comrade. So going through that many times, and I mean sometimes it would really make me angry because I would sit up here and we need a statement about something, something, something. And when you can write, everybody wants you to write. So you sit down and you're the writer. And you sit up all night, and I would go the next day to the meeting, and nobody would show. And I said, well, what happened? Oh, didn't you know the meeting was canceled? Oh. And I went through literally years of that on all different kinds of levels. And on one hand, I was very committed, so it was very difficult for me to say no. It was very difficult for me to get into personal things like, well, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, because it was just a hassle. I didn't want to be bothered, and it wasn't until I got later developed that I knew that it wasn't a personal hassle, that it was something that I had to address on a principal level. The abuse of the work of not only my work, but the abuse of sisters' work, the ignoring. You can say something and you spend, you'd be talking 15 minutes, and then and then some brother would get up and repeat something that you said, and he said, "That's a good idea, brother." You say, well, what is this? What am I dealing with? What do I have to do? Who do I have to be respected, to be listened to? What must I be to be a comrade? And it was, I mean, it's something that we all as women have to face. How do we make ourselves heard? As I was telling some of you yesterday, you just could not be the human being that you were. Like I couldn't be who I was because I'm, like a little timid. Although, there's this image, but I am naturally timid, naturally shy.
Another one of those.
I mean, to get in front of a group of people, the first time I had to do it, I thought I was just going to literally die, right then and there, because I had been socialized to be timid. It wasn't just that my personality was timid, but it was the way that I had been socialized. Women weren't supposed to get up in front of crowds of women. That was not an image that came easily to you. That was not something that I was primed for. So it was like, oh my God, and I had to overcome that. And so that when you see strong women who hold, strong positions in revolutionary struggles, you know what they went through. It wasn't just that they didn't go through what men went through. Men go through half of what women go through to become effective political leaders. Mm-hmm. Because everybody, it's easy for them, it's easy for their work to be recognized. Mm-hmm. Because other men are anxious to recognize their work. When I started becoming active in political organizations, men were not anxious to recognize my work. They were anxious to recognize my body. And it was always very difficult for me to get past the body trip, to really get around it, because it always came up. It came up in that I would have problems, with people because they wanted to get in my drawers, and then once it was clear that was nothing happening, then I was on their list for the rest of the duration, and it was like, and then if you had a relationship with somebody, and then it was over, then it was like this whole attitude of, well, we relate personally, so well, wait a minute, this is a political issue. Our relationship has nothing to do with this, never did or never will. We're talking about apples and you talking about, peaches. What is the point? But women are constantly confronted with these issues in our political work. And if we don't say, look, these are the ethical ways that that the sexes have to work together. Other things are not just, personal things, but they are politically unethical. And for example, we were brainwashed. There's no question about it, because, part of the whole psychology of women is, you're not educated to be the leader, but you are educated to go to bed with the leader, to fall in love with the leader. The leader is your hero. And, you get the leader, everybody's trying to, get next to him this way and that way. And there was a lot of that going on in all of us mentally. We were at a serious disadvantage in our relationships with men, because we were very confused about what we wanted also. It wasn't a question of just the men, it was a question of us too, because it was like, we accepted a lot of things that were clearly unprincipled, because we were either trying to get next to some dude. It was part of our psychology. But, part of it was also the 60s. And I think that, when I look back on it, we didn't, I don't think that I was to the same kind of vibe that Elaine Brown describes as, free love, etc. But I feel regret that I did not take some of those relationships that I made more seriously. Part of it was my childhood, being young. But another part of it was that I had not reached the kind of consciousness that I have now, that, political struggle is not just about changing structures. Mm-hmm. It's not enough to talk about, I want to change a government. It's not enough to talk about a chicken in every pot or democracy or whatever. You have to internalize it. And that means changing your relationships with other human beings, changing your ability to care about other human beings. And one of the things that I see now is we have a very totally male dominated political structure, a political style, a political way of working, but we also had a very male oriented way of relating to each other on a whole series of levels. For example, women. If you have PMS and nobody had ever heard of it then, it was your problem. I mean, who cares if you have cramps? Ain't nobody want to hear about your cramps. Don't nobody want to hear about your baby. Don't nobody hear about your babysitters or your lack of babysitters or anything else. You supposed to be at the meeting. Nobody is concerned about what dinner. Where does it come from? You know, it's supposed to come from you. And if it doesn't come from you, then you know you got to fight to make it not to be in the kitchen. I mean, you know, I remember people trying to herd me into the kitchen. I thought you are herding the wrong person in the kitchen. I go in that kitchen, and what you cook, I can't cook. So you know, you better herd somebody else. You know, and I think for years I wouldn't cook, and that was just my self-defense against being somebody trying to herd me into the kitchen, because we had this liberation school, right? And then I was in college, and all of a sudden nobody even thought of it. The men were all the directors of the school. Now we were all students the same year, but the men were all the directors, you know. And then came lunch. You know, you had to feed the kids. All right, sisters. Well, the sisters go to the kitchen and prepare the food, you know. And like I had in the morning, these little kids I'm trying to teach, 13, 14 years old, can barely read, multiply, divide. Okay, and I'm committed to this. This is like, you know, I'm gonna get these kids somewhere this summer, boy. They come, you know, we're gonna work. Then in the afternoon, I got arts and crafts. I'm up to my head in paint and everything else, you know, and somebody wants me to go in the middle of this and cook lunch, you know, are you crazy? So finally, after, you know, a big struggle, the food came from somewhere else, and brothers helped or whatever. But, you know, it got resolved. But the immediate, in the 60s, attitude was that, what's the problem? You don't like to cook. Don't you know you're a woman? And being an African woman was, you know, had a whole nother set, because you were supposed to be like your sisters in Africa. And the reason why everything was so messed up was because the African family had gone astray, because we had castrated our men. I mean, and so I said, you know, we did castrate our men, and you know, and I was like, oh my God, did I do that?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, but there was a whole thing, and you know, about black women as castrators. And I would go to meetings. I mean, this is in the early 60s. And, you know, brothers, it was seriously proposed the sisters should walk 10 feet behind brothers. You know what I mean? And it would be serious proposals, you know, and they would get up and they would run this stuff, and you'd be like, well, you know, and then the next thing, you know, it was like, you must bring a bowl. You know, we did this cultural event, and, you know, the sisters were supposed to bring this bowl with the water so that the brothers could wash their hands and stuff. And there were organizations at that time where sisters were supposed to bend their heads down when brothers came in. And I don't want to mention any names of organizations, but you know, there's enough sisters around that if we ever get to telling our stories in the movement, it would be a very interesting project. I mean, that in terms of a book or in terms of a film, because I mean, the experiences were devastating. They were devastating to many women, because, you know, a lot of women were serious about struggling, and then got in a struggle, got in a relationship, and were totally frustrated in their ability to struggle because of, you know, personal resistance from their mates, from their organization, and had no backup.
And we are Black on the Liberation Hour with Angelique Kidjo and Assata Shakur. former member of the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army, speaking to a delegation of the New African Women's Task Force in Havana, Cuba, in 1993 about her experiences in the movement. We continue now with the dialogue. Sister Assata was asked, what are some of the things that we can do to combat most of the ills she talked about?
So what's like the direction or guidelines in terms of, where we are today?
Well, I think that we can have to stop. First of all, I think the first step toward changing something is to educate. And I think that the first people that we have to educate are ourselves. And I think that we have to go through and identify the different things that as political activists, women suffer. That the different things that women in our communities suffer. And to start addressing those things, systematically, bit by bit, so that we have an analysis. Because you can't, if you don't have an analysis of the problem, it's very difficult to educate. So, I mean, the first thing for us to do is to, I think, make an analysis of where we are. We've made some progress. I mean, sisters are much more aware, thank goodness, than we were 10, 20 years ago. And we've got to start sharing that with each other, sharing that with younger sisters, writing about it, documenting what our struggle has been, and then trying to take it to another level. I think one of the problems that we have is being unorganized, because there are a lot of ways that sisters can be organized. I mean, it's not just, we can be organized in political organizations and like y'all in the task force, and I think that's very important. But I think there's a lot of survival organizing that we can do. We can get together in terms of child care collectives, whether it's in terms of healing collectives, whether it's in terms, and by healing collectives, I've heard some very positive things about healing collectives and some very negative, things that it comes to tell all and touchy feely and cry all day. I'm not talking about that. When I talk about healing collectives, I mean, I think it's important for us to get things that are in our systems out and some of the pain out. But I think that it's also that's useless unless we do something. So I think that a lot, healing has to do with activity, because there's no, otherwise what's the point? You heal to do what? I mean, to stay a victim, to damn your daughters to the same situation that you're in. So if you're not actively doing something, then I think that in terms of changing reality, then the whole healing approach to things is fraudulent. With it, and when I say doing something, I don't mean any specific thing. Writing is doing something, speaking is doing something. There are all kinds of ways of activity, and I don't believe that there's any one way that people need to act, nor do I believe there's any one way that people need to organize. I think that in terms of pure survival, I think sisters need to organize collectives to support sisters who are homeless and to support each other in those kinds of things. I think that whether it's in terms of jobless sisters or I mean, there's so many ways that we can organize that we don't. And I think we just need to just analyze where we are and what we can do to reach out to other sisters, And I think that it's important in order for us to be able to effectively reach out to other sisters to really, struggle within our own movement against homophobia, because I think that one of the things that has held us back in terms of sisters reaching out to sisters has been the issue of homophobia, because you take a sister from one movement and she goes to a meeting and there are 30 lesbians in the meeting. Now she has no prior experience with lesbians and no clear political position about lesbians, then she gets freaked out, and then it's the whole thing of, well, I don't want anybody to think I'm a lesbian and all of this stuff, but I think that if you really are serious about dealing with the issue of struggling against homophobia, that you have to deal with that and not permit any sister to be, for lack of another word, gay baited. Because somebody asked me if I'm gay. So what if I am? What is your point in asking that? What you said you asked me that to ask what? What does that have to do with the time of day? Do you want to go out? I mean, what is? And I don't allow people to play those kind of games because I don't like those kind of games. I think that it's difficult at first, but I think that as one's principles become stronger, then I don't feel any need to argue with anybody about anything or to say I'm not really concerned. I mean, sometimes I've been in a situation, and because I'm always alone, or people say, "Well, she's gay," and I have been thankful. It has been so easy, much easier to work. I said, keep thinking, fine. It is. But I enjoy the distance, to tell you the truth, at different times and places because men somehow they treat you in another way. So I mean, I have not found those kinds of things to be a problem once I decided where my politics were, where my sentiments were, and who I am, and had no problem, being myself. I think that we're at a point now that we have so many problems as a people that we have to really define what morality is and isn't. And I think that, we all grew up being exposed to a kind of homophobic morality. And people said that if a man doesn't go to bed with another man and a woman doesn't go to bed with another woman, and you have sex after you're married and not before, then you're moral. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that is the kind of morality that the right wing is trying to push. And if we have the same morality, then we fall into a whole lot of traps. Because what happens is they can talk about, well, who's going to bed with who isn't and who is, and that's moral, but can be all around the world, all around the country, oppressing people, beating people to death, burning crosses, talk about our moral, And I think that is a totally reactionary type of morality. And for people who really are interested in social change, we have to really talk about what is moral.
You are listening to excerpts of a conversation with Sister Assata Shakur, former member of the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army in Havana, Cuba in 1993. She was speaking with a delegation of women from the New African Women's Task Force regarding her experiences dealing in the movement, our movements for liberation. In this final brief segment, she was asked about the issue of violence against women.
The United States is so violent in all aspects that the violence against women would have to increase. The culture makes everybody more violent, and one of the most unfortunate things is its effect on women because we're seen as easy targets. We're not supposed to be able to fight. We're not supposed to be able to defend ourselves. So every man thinks of us as, I can beat her. They don't even think about, the possibility that you might be able to beat them, and which really makes them easily beatable because if you know a little something, you kick their ass. I mean, women, we are also very much brainwashed into thinking that men can beat us up. And even though that they are stronger physically, but when it comes to fighting, physical strength without discipline, without knowledge, is of very little use. So that, I think that sisters need to get a whole nother consciousness about our bodies, about who we are and what we're capable of doing. Because in a fight, the most important thing is not to panic, to be able to think, to be able to calculate, to be able to figure out what's the next move. And in most things, we are better at doing that in most every category than men are. So then that should make us naturally very good warriors. And African tradition from thousands of years, the sisters have been warriors and bodyguards. And so that I think that, we have been very much brainwashed. But as a result of our experience on the plantation, the new one plantation and the old one, about who we are and about what we're capable of. So I think one of the things that we've got to do as sisters is start talking to other sisters about our body power and really, forming a culture of body awareness among ourselves.
Unmute. So that was part one of the presentation. That was Mama Assata Shakur speaking to a delegation of the New African Women's Task Force in Cuba in 1993.